A police dog suddenly barked at an officer during a routine check. No one expected what his ID would reveal just seconds later. Why did the entire room fall dead silent? Now here comes the full story. But before we get into it, drop your dog's name in the comments and make sure you hit that subscribe button. The coastal town of Everett, Washington stirred awake under a fog-draped morning. A salty breeze rolled in from the Puget Sound, brushing past patrol cars already forming a line outside the regional training facility for K-9 units. The day marked the start of the annual interagency inspection where dogs and handlers from various districts converged for performance testing, equipment checks, and protocol reviews. Officer Brent Holloway, a 21-year veteran of the department, stood beside his black German Shepherd Mason. The dog, now 7 years old, had been with Brent for 6 of those years. Together they had tracked fugitives across frozen forests, located missing hikers near the Cascades, and sniffed out contraband from dozens of vehicles. The two operated like a single machine, but Brent had always said that Mason was the real officer between them. That morning, as the two waited for their turn, Mason sat quietly by Brent's left leg, his ears forward, body alert but calm. Several other dogs milled around with their handlers, some barking lightly or tugging at their leashes. It was organized chaos, trained animals, each with a job to do, gathering in one space. As they neared the inspection zone, a long gravel stretch where patrol vans were parked for K-9 drills, Brent noticed a face he didn't immediately recognize. The man wore a crisp officer uniform bearing the insignia of a neighboring district. His sunglasses sat low on the bridge of his nose, and a laminated ID badge hung from a black lanyard around his neck. He leaned against a patrol van near the far edge of the lot, casually sipping from a foam cup. Nothing about the man appeared immediately out of place. Still, Brent could feel Mason's body stiffen beside him. Without warning, Mason jerked forward with a sharp growl that sliced through the morning air. Brent gripped the leash tightly, but the dog strained, baring his teeth, his stance shifting from alert to aggressive, his gaze locked on the unknown officer. The reaction was uncharacteristic. Mason was not easily rattled. He had barked at suspects, charged at threats, and remained composed in dangerous situations. But this was different. This bark carried something else, an urgency Brent had rarely heard. Handlers nearby turned their heads. A few officers reached for their dogs instinctively. The air grew tighter, heavier, like the wind itself held its breath. The man near the van took a half step back, raising his free hand slowly as if unsure of what had triggered the reaction. Brent knelt by Mason, placing a steadying hand on his harness. But Mason refused to break eye contact with the man. His tail was still, his bark sharp and deliberate. Brent had seen that look once before, years ago, when they had cornered a fugitive disguised as a paramedic. Commanders moved quickly. An inspection lead approached, questioning Brent, and then the man in question. The officer presented his badge calmly, stating his name and precinct. Everything seemed in order, but Mason kept barking, and he would not stop. Something wasn't adding up. The inspection lead signaled for a verification team. 2 officers escorted the man away from the van and into the facility office, where a more thorough credential check would be done. Brent stayed back, gripping Mason's harness, trying to calm the animal who had never once barked without cause. Inside the office, the air was silent save for the click of keys. A database search was launched. One of the supervisors removed his glasses. The badge number the man provided belonged to someone else entirely. A retired officer, no longer active, who had moved to Arizona 5 years earlier. The ID badge was a near-perfect replica. The uniform was regulation. The insignia was authentic. Even the patrol van he leaned against had the right markings, except it had been reported stolen from a locked city lot the previous night. Back outside, Brent sensed something in the air shift. Not fear, not shock, but realization. Mason had known. Before the human mind could rationalize anything, the dog had reacted. He had sensed something off in posture, in scent, in silence. By the time word reached the officers outside, Mason had calmed only slightly. Brent walked him slowly in circles near the line of vans, letting him decompress. Officers around them watched with a new kind of stillness. The fake officer was now in custody, silent under questioning. But more disturbing was what he had left inside the van. A sweep of the stolen vehicle revealed no weapons, no explosives. Instead, buried beneath a false floor in the cargo section, authorities found multiple sets of law enforcement credentials, various uniforms from surrounding districts, and a locked metal briefcase. Inside the briefcase were hand-drawn floor plans of the facility, notes, schedules, specific timings related to the inspection. It was not random. Someone had been planning something, watching. The man in custody wasn't talking, and nothing about him existed in the databases. No priors, no fingerprints, not even a real name. The briefcase held something else too, dozens of photos, surveillance pictures of officers, including Brent. And in one of them, Mason was front and center, mid-leap during a training drill, his handler in the background. Whatever this man had planned, Mason had cut it short. By the afternoon, the facility was locked down. Federal investigators had arrived, and local police scrambled to tighten protocols. But among all the controlled chaos, Brent sat beside Mason in the break area, silently feeding him bits of dried jerky from his pocket. The dog had not barked since, not at the federal agents, not at the other officers, not even at the press that gathered beyond the barriers. Only that man, only that moment. Brent thought about the past cases they had solved together. The missing girl they found in the woods, the runaway teen they discovered hidden in a shed. Mason had a way of knowing, always had. But this was the first time it had felt personal. Later that night, Brent returned home, leaving Mason's vest and leash near the front door. He sat on the back porch overlooking the dense tree line. Mason rested nearby, ears relaxed now, eyes half closed, sensing the storm had passed. But something lingered, a chill that had nothing to do with weather, a puzzle that had not yet finished laying its pieces. And somewhere in the evidence room, the surveillance photo of Mason stared back from inside that briefcase, as if someone had been watching not just the unit, but the dog himself. The following morning, the Everett precinct was still buzzing. A command tent had gone up beside the facility, and federal vehicles now lined the outer road like armored bookends. No one talked openly about what had happened the day before. Still, a heaviness had wrapped itself around the department like fog over the harbor. Brent arrived just after 6, Mason by his side, both of them sharper than sleep should allow. The dog moved with fluid focus, his head low but eyes scanning. Something unspoken had shifted inside him. Brent felt it, even if he could not name it. The command center had made it clear. No one was to speak to media, and all shifts would be reassigned until internal audits were complete. Surveillance had been breached, identity faked, and a stolen patrol van entered a secure police event. That raised questions none of them could yet answer. But Brent could not shake one detail. That man had been watching Mason. Most people would not understand what that meant. Mason was more than a tracker or narcotics dog. His instincts ran deeper. He was the kind of dog who reacted to silence more than sound, who caught lies in body language and truth in the way someone stepped into a room. And now Brent knew someone had been studying that. Brent stepped into the briefing room where a few officers sipped coffee, talking in low tones. A whiteboard displayed images pulled from the man's briefcase facility, blueprints, shift logs, cropped photographs taken from a distance. A red X marked the officer check-in zone. Another X near the weapons locker. A third, fainter, centered over the K-9 unit staging lot. Not one officer could recall the man ever speaking, even during his ID check. His entire cover had relied on movement, mimicry, observation. That meant whoever sent him had studied long enough to understand how an officer acted even in silence. One printout remained pinned near the center, the photo of Mason. His mouth open mid-bark, his back arched, eyes locked on something out of frame. Brent stared at it longer than he should have. Mason had barked before anything was known, and somehow the enemy knew enough to fear that bark. That same morning, a search warrant had been executed on a storage unit registered under a false identity linked to the imposter. It sat on the edge of Snohomish County, hidden behind a row of rusted shipping containers. What investigators found there turned the tone of the investigation entirely. Inside the unit were 3 more uniforms, each bearing different jurisdictions, alongside them detailed maps of various precincts. But more alarming, several small devices that appeared to be surveillance transmitters, and dozens of pages handwritten in code, and a faded photo. It showed a young man standing next to a canine handler at what looked like a graduation ceremony from a police academy years ago. The face was blurred, the paper worn, but the uniform patch on the handler's shoulder was unmistakable. Everett Police. Brent stared at it when they brought it back. Something clicked deep in his chest. He could not place the man, but the symbol behind the photo was more than coincidence. Was it possible this was personal? Later that day, Mason was called into another controlled search. The FBI had requested that the dog sweep several other unoccupied vehicles parked near the perimeter. Brent ran the leash through his fingers as Mason moved from one tire to another, nose down, tail rigid. One car, an old Ford, made Mason pause. He circled its trunk 3 times before letting out a single sharp bark. The agents opened the trunk slowly. Inside was a duffel bag lined with cables, pressure sensors, and an external hard drive. No explosives, but not nothing. The drive was turned over to digital forensics. Hours later, word came back. Its contents included building schematics from several police departments across the state. But one file stood out. It was a motion-activated video feed recorded from a small wireless camera. The camera had been placed weeks earlier in the canine training yard at Everett's own facility. Whoever this was had eyes inside the department long before the inspection day. That night, Brent sat at his kitchen table staring at an open case file. Names, timelines, deployment records, and disciplinary reports from over a decade of department history. He had requested files on any officers with unusual exits, those who resigned early, those who transferred without explanation. One name resurfaced. A young handler named Owen Mercer. Joined at 22. Transferred within 3 years. No commendations, no infractions, just a clean, silent departure. What stood out was the brief mention of a canine assignment that never materialized. His application was denied late in review due to concerns over temperament. Brent remembered the name vaguely, a man always on the edge of things, watching but never speaking much. Had shown promise in simulations but lacked calm under pressure. Brent remembered Mason reacting to him once, nothing aggressive, just a growl as Owen had tried to pat him on the flank. It was barely a memory, but now it throbbed like a bruise beneath the skin. Was it possible that rejection had grown into something else? Was someone taking apart the department piece by piece from the shadows? Brent did not know, but what he did know, Mason had been targeted, not randomly, not by mistake. The next day brought heavier clouds and a colder wind. The investigation continued, new pieces falling into place. More dogs were cycled through security drills. Mason was not called in. Brent took him to a nearby trail instead, where the dog moved freely, sniffing moss and bark, tail finally up again. But even there, in the quiet stretch of pine, Brent could not shake the weight of it all. This had not been a random infiltration. It had been a rehearsal, and Mason had interrupted the script. The question now was whether it had been the first attempt or the last. Rain pressed down on Everett like a quiet warning. Thin lines streaked down windshields. Patrol cars sat in idle clusters outside the precinct, while inside, a silence hung thick. The federal task force had narrowed its scope. What began as a false ID check had spiraled into a statewide security breach. At the center of it all stood a black German shepherd who had refused to look the other way. Mason had been temporarily pulled from active deployment, not for disciplinary reasons, but because of what he represented. The dog had become part of the case, a witness, a symbol, even a threat to whoever had orchestrated the breach. Brent understood the decision but did not like it. He stayed late most nights now, sifting through printouts and digital reports, sleeping with his boots on. His desk bore the weight of paper and memory, but none of it connected until a call came in from a detective in Tacoma. They had arrested a man near an abandoned factory outside city limits. The man had tried to scale a locked fence during curfew hours. What caught attention was what he dropped when he ran. A fake officer badge, identical to the one found at the inspection site. But this one had blood on it. Brent drove down that morning, Mason in the back seat, eyes bright despite the cold gray light. When they arrived, Brent was led to an evidence table. Alongside the badge was a phone with no SIM card. But the gallery contained multiple surveillance photos taken weeks apart. Officers entering police stations, canine handlers with their dogs. One series focused entirely on Brent's home, another on the training facility. The most recent image had a timestamp from just 3 nights ago. Brent felt his spine go stiff. The photo showed Mason sitting on the back porch. Behind him, the faint outline of Brent through the kitchen window. This was no longer about targeting the precinct. This had crossed into something personal. Back in Everett, forensic teams finally cracked the drive recovered from the Ford's trunk. In a hidden partition, they found video recordings, low-res but clear. One showed someone dressed in an Everett police uniform walking into the secure kennel bay after hours. No alarm was tripped. The badge they used had proper clearance. The only anomaly was timing. The footage had been from 2 months prior, long before the scheduled inspection. They stood still for a full minute staring. Then they left. Brent knew what this meant. Mason had been watched, studied. Someone had not just tried to infiltrate the inspection. They had planned to remove or neutralize the very dog capable of sensing them. But Mason had spoken first, with a bark. Later that evening, Brent took Mason to the training yard, empty now under the veil of dusk. He let the dog off leash, watched as he ran familiar patterns through obstacles and over ramps. But Brent noticed something in the way Mason moved, calculated, intentional, as if the dog too understood this was not training anymore. When Brent walked the edge of the lot, Mason trotted back toward him, stopping at the far fence. He began barking, not wild, not fearful, just steady. Brent walked over. On the other side of the fence stood a narrow service alley. Trash bins, shadows, nothing visible, but Mason kept barking. Brent circled through the main gate and approached the alley from behind, hand on his holster. Rain soaked through his collar as he rounded the final corner. He froze. A man stood at the fence, inches from where Mason had barked, dressed in civilian clothes, a duffel bag in hand. Something metallic glinted inside it. The man ran. Brent followed. They cut through an empty lot, then into the tree line. Branches whipped Brent's arms. Roots grabbed at his boots. The man ahead moved fast, but without aim. Brent knew this terrain. So did Mason. The dog had already looped wide and was gaining. Near a clearing, the man tripped, slamming into wet earth. Brent reached him seconds later, weapon drawn. The duffel bag slid open to reveal more credentials, more maps, another hard drive. But what made Brent's blood freeze was the photo the man had carried in his jacket pocket. It was of Mason. A red marker had drawn a thick X across the dog's face. The man said nothing, did not even resist. He just stared. Back at the precinct, the man was identified through deep forensic databases, a former cadet dismissed from training years ago for falsifying identity documents. His record showed a long history of mental instability, but his movements had been meticulous. His entire operation was part of something larger, something that had yet to reveal itself. As officers pieced together statements, Mason remained curled beside Brent's desk. Calm now, alert, a quiet presence in a world that had nearly turned on itself. Investigators later confirmed the full intent of the plan. The imposter's goal was to plant compromised surveillance in regional K-9 centers, allowing external actors to monitor shift changes, handler movements, and patrol coverage. But Mason had been the variable, the dog who noticed what humans did not, who barked first, who disrupted everything, and someone out there had known he would. The final piece came days later. Brent was walking Mason near the harbor when a call came in. A safe house in Oregon had been raided, files recovered, more photos, more lists. Among them, a schedule for future inspections across the western states. Everett had been the test run, and it had failed. Because of one dog. Weeks passed. Security protocols were rewritten, identity verification systems upgraded. But through it all, one truth remained. Mason had not just saved the inspection, he had exposed an entire network hiding in plain sight. The town of Everett never released full details to the public, but inside the precinct, officers spoke of it often. Of the moment Mason barked and everything stopped. Of the way a dog had seen through a uniform when no one else had. Brent never returned to the training yard the same way again. Every time he walked those gravel lanes, he saw Mason not as a K-9 unit, but as the sentinel who refused to stay silent. If that moment had you hooked, just wait till you see what the next story reveals. These dogs are uncovering things no one else can. So don't miss out. Tap like, hit subscribe, and be here when the next shocker drops.